Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going over the best way to farm super credits, samples, and medals on the new Illuminate update. The cost of all this new stuff just keeps going up, and the Killzone Crossover was probably the biggest hit to super credits that I've seen yet. And they just keep adding stratagems to warbond, so you need more super credits than ever. But by the end of this, you should have the efficiency of a super looter to blast out all the credits, samples, and medals that you'll ever need, so you don't have to worry about any new ship modules or drops ever again. I also did lock in the perfect build to do it all for you, so all the text guides you see will always be linked down below in every video and are always updated in my Discord first. But for now, we're lighting this off with the best way to farm super credits. Tier 1 difficulty is the most efficient way to farm in general because of how all the POIs spawn and allocate themselves around the map. There's almost no enemies to fight either, so it's always a super chill run to just throw a movie on the other screen and just blast out for an hour. But since the last time I made this guide, things have changed pretty drastically and are substantially better. The new city maps are going to be the big key to success here because they average 11 POIs on just the outside of the city with a bunch more inside. Also, tiering up in difficulty from like tier 1 to 2 only increased the average POIs from like 11 to 15-ish. So it wasn't really worth it, and it just took longer on a slightly larger map with more enemies and, more importantly, more enemy spawn locations that eat up our POIs that could potentially spawn loot, and we don't want to have to do this any longer than we need to. We are also exclusively looking for city maps that look like this. The smaller the city, the better off we are, because this new biome clumps all of the lootable POIs on the outside really nicely. There's a few things you can loot in the city, but in general, I don't think it's ever worth going inside because a lot of the things in there are just like ammo or weapons. So in a 4-man, you would want to drop on the side so that two of you could just split and go each way, and you would finish the map in under a minute. But if you're duo, I really recommend that you start on one side of the map and then you just sweep the outside of the city so that you can finish it in an average of like 2 to 3 minutes. You want to do this because the amount of buddy doors you get is like insane on these city maps. And a lot of the times we were just spawning in on top of one. You could also loot 100 super credits, but it's like 1 in 100. I haven't gotten one yet this update, so this is just an old clip to show that it is possible. I did confirm with a couple people in my chat that have been farming that they have gotten the 100 super credit drop, so congrats to you, and hopefully you guys get lucky. But again, we are still getting like 50 to 80 a run, so it's really not that big of a deal. I've also been farming on this update to see what the different averages are. So solo, I was getting about 600. Duo, I was getting 1200. And in a 4-man, we were averaging about 1800 super credits per hour, which is a massive increase from before. And I highly recommend you at least get a duo for this because of all the double doors that spawn. There's going to be tons of them, and you can't loot them solo. You can glitch into them, but you can't loot them. And we were getting tons of double and triple stacks of super credits inside of them. This also seconds as a decent farm for medals and requisition because when you pick them up, they automatically apply to your account. And when you abandon, you don't lose anything that you pick up in the mission outside of samples. So just keep that in mind as you're blasting through this. If you're newer, you're still getting quite a bit of rewards. And if you do want to finish the mission for EXP and a little bit of extra requisition, you can, but it'll take about 5 minutes instead of like 2 to 3. Now, moving on to the actual farming part of this, a long time ago, they fixed the Alt F4 exploit. So if you're a returning player, that means that you can't re-loot the same map over and over again, so don't bother trying. Once you finish looting, just abandon the mission and go on to the next one. There are also some planets that are just way better to load into than others. Like this snow biome with the city was just insanely good because of how open and easy it was to see everything. You could literally see all the lootable POIs from where we spawned in, and this is your perfect ideal situation. And once we unlock the car as a permanent stratagem, you could have one person driving and the other in the passenger seat pinging loot on the go. And to ping loot, you just open your map, and whatever binds you have might be different from mine, but you can just scroll around, hover over the points of interest because they'll pop up as you hover over them, and you can just ping them for the driver to rip over to. The reason I'm including the car is to future-proof the video because eventually we'll have it all the time, and if you randomly get lucky, you can speed your run up drastically. So anytime you hover over a map and you see this nice wide open space without any hills or water, you have the perfect T1 farming map. But when you see something like this, avoid it at all costs. The hills and water will eat POIs, and this lowers the amount of loot you're going to get, making it a massive waste of time to load into. We also updated our mood dang metric scale to help you avoid the bad planets and stay on the good ones. This is the most accurate degradation you will ever see in your entire life, and it's still based by cute by radians, by super credits squared. You better remember all that because the second time I said it, and it's a mouthful. And as of the last guide, I loaded into all these biomes 100 times each to test all of them. So while the new city maps are the flat out best to load into, and they turn any 3 dang into a full on dang diver, if they don't have a city, they can still easily be cleared in under 2 minutes and are all extremely easy to traverse. Now, as we move on, the lower the dang we get, the worse it gets, with the Keck W essentially just being mean planets that will completely waste your time with the worst terrain imaginable for farming. This chart is also set up this way because the planets are constantly rotating, which means they won't always have the same names. You can check the biome by just hovering over the planet. The little card will pop up. You just match it to that and you'll be good to go. You also want to stick to the Illuminate or bots for farming missions because they are basically empty and you can pick like any of their missions, while the bugs have the Brood Commander maps that eat up the pool and despawn too many POIs. And now that we're getting into the missions, you want to make sure you have at least a decent build that lets you keep W keying everything. The most important thing you can load for now is the jetpack, and in the future, obviously the car once it gets added, if things are nice and flat, so that way you don't roll it all the time. But in general, the jetpack has always speeded these runs up by a crazy amount. As a warning, if you're going too fast, you will fall over a lot using the jetpack now, so just let go of shift and tap S while you're in there, and you should be okay. Sometimes you'll still fall over though. Just make sure that you lock in the stamina booster with it so that way you don't get drained too hard. And if you do have a duo, grab Hellpod optimization so that you can just slam stims and go faster. And if you do want to go faster, just sprint your stamina bar down to 0 and then stim and it'll reset it and be maxed out for a couple of seconds before it can drain again. And then you can just sprint the whole thing down and just keep doing that over and over again. You also want to take in the highest speed armor possible, and the newest Warbond Urban Legends has a really solid light armor in it right off the rip. But any of the light armors will cut it for the most part, and if you do run into any enemies, just throw the Gatling or machine gun sentry and they'll clean everything up for you so you could just ignore them and go back to W key farming. We also did swap from the grenade launcher over to the anti-material rifle to break open doors because the new barrels explode with fire now and they stop you from looting for a second, so you just want to pop the doors of the AMR and move on. Now moving on to metal farming, the new Illuminate blow the warp ships up is the flat out best mission in the game to just blast fast metals out, so you just want to lock that in. And if you want to sample farm, the min game that you want to go into is tier 6, so that way you can get super samples. And if you're good enough to do 10s, just blast that instead because you'll average way more samples across the board. I know a lot of people like blowing out blitzes to suck up all the loot because the maps are usually smaller and it's guaranteed to spawn all of the samples in the playable area, unlike the POIs. So you want to go for things with tons of dead space in this case, which is the opposite of a super credit farm, where you have tons of rocks and water. So that way all the samples are just clumped up because, again, they're guaranteed to be there. I personally don't like blitzes though because I feel rushed on the timer and mentally it just messes with me for whatever reason. So I prefer and recommend that you just go build good fundamentals and blast regular missions out. We still do blitzes and we get like half the samples, but on average we get like 75% of the map on a normal mission and then we just leave. And I think it's way more chill to loot the big maps, and it's honestly only like an extra 5 to 10 minutes anyways, with the guarantee that we're going to get everything out. So as long as you're exploring the POIs and you're just taking the extra time to learn them and how everything spawns on them, you can just suck up all the loot super fast once you learn how everything spawns. There's only like 2 to 3 variants of everything. And I think that after doing this for so long that you'll have a better long-term experience overall if you just take your time to learn and gather everything in sight so you can just move on. This is something I said last guide, but you can't expect to be able to tell 3 random people how to play the game that they paid for, so they're not going to be on your schedule at all because they aren't looking for a guide. They're just there to slam 12 beers and play Helldivers. You're looking for the guide, and you need to take the reins to be the loot goblin you were meant to be, while everyone else is running around in circles doing nothing. Also, for the higher tiers, it's important to know what you're dropping into, and I have all the spawn seeds updated for bots and bugs for this update. I went and double checked everything, so you can see exactly what enemies you're going to be dropping into 99% of the time, 100% of the time. I do recommend slamming tier 10 bugs on the nurse seed because it's insanely easy to plow through, and the big nurses eat up almost all the spawns from the more dangerous enemies. They're also super weak to explosives and very slow, letting you loot pretty much everything no problem. A final note is that everything you loot is also shared with everyone in the party at the time of pickup, so if someone joins late, they just won't get anything. And if you do need to find people to play with, I highly recommend joining any creator that you vibe with's Discord. That's probably where you're going to meet like-minded people, and make sure you perform the right rituals while you're farming super credits. We must get the 100 super credits, brother.
Indeed, brother, we must.
It is your duty.
I will complete the duty.
You have failed.
Tell my wife I was a failure.